Hello and welcome to EURACTIV's Agrifood podcast. I'm Gerardo Fortuna.
And I'm Paula Andrés.
And here's your weekly update on everything agriculture and food in the EU from EURACTIV's Agrifood team.
This week, Ukraine grain bans and the latest on live transport of animals.
So welcome back to another episode of EURACTIV's Agrifood podcast. Paula is actually from my home country.
Yes!
It's not true, I'm not Spanish. but
My home country.
My home country, because 40% of people working in Brussels think that I'm Spanish because of my name.
It would be, if you would be Spanish, it would be, no, if you would be Catalan, it would be Gerard. But
Gerard. Okay.
Gerard.
Okay.
Yes.
But I have people who actually send me emails in Italian and Spanish because they assume that Gerardo Fortuna is my real. It's actually a Spanish name, which it is.
You can understand them though.
Yeah. But still, this podcast episode is for the other 60% of people who actually address me in any other language. But apart from that, I take the opportunity to promote blatantly your article from Spain on the situation in Doñana. We know everything about that because last week in the podcast you were basically dealing with the focus on that, but there was also follow-up, actually 2 follow-ups. So keep you up to date with the 2 articles from Paula on EURACTIV.com. Having said that, what happened this week, Paula, here in Brussels? We can say that agri-food and agriculture in general was great again, let's say, because it was on the cover of every newspapers, on the front page of every newspapers, because of the situation in the Eastern European countries. Some of them, they put forward grain bans for Ukraine imports, not only about grain, but also about other agri-food products, because as our listeners remember, there's a combination of factors. One was the solidarity lanes. The solidarity lanes is an initiative by the European Commission in the aftermath of the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And this initiative was aimed at helping Ukraine export agricultural commodities via all possible routes. This happened in particular in time when the Black Sea route, the main route for Ukraine to export its agricultural products, was blocked during the war. Now it's partially, it's reopened, but the agreement is a bit. The implementation agreement is a bit complicated because it's basically renewed every, I think, 3 or 4 months. So it's still good for Ukraine to have other routes through the, for instance, the European Danube River. So in combination with that, there was also the temporary trade liberalization scheme proposed and approved by the EU last summer, which is basically a scheme that suspended tariffs and quotas for agri-food imports from Ukraine. This had triggered some problems in the bordering countries, not only in the bordering countries, because, for instance, even Bulgaria was affected, and Bulgaria is not bordering Ukraine. That's why, for instance, the Commission last week used the term frontline countries, so all the countries affected by the current situation, by the consequences of the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And what happened? It happened that Poland, Hungary, and then also Slovakia approved some unilateral ban to agricultural products coming from Ukraine. This was actually, it created a lot of tension between Brussels and these capitals. Indeed, it was actually on Saturday, 15th of April, that Poland and Hungary banned the imports of grain and other food. And then immediately the day after, on Monday, the Commission already announced a further support package for EU farmers hit by the influx of Ukraine agricultural products. Also, Slovakia, the day after, um, actually communicated again, an unilateral decision to suspend technically this temporary liberalization scheme, because this is a bit of like the main problem of understanding the situation, because it's an overlapping of two different aspects. Because what they're doing is to basically suspending this scheme as a consequence of as a consequence of the scheme, but mostly as a consequence of the solidarity lanes. Actually, it means that the solidarity lanes were a success, and maybe it was also too much of a success for the EU standards. But anyway, uh, the Commission already addressed the issue by putting forward a first package of aid using the Agricultural Reserve Fund, which actually, Paula, you're an expert of Agriculture Reserve
Am I?
Fund. Yeah, because Paula did a very nice video explainers. I also suggest. Oh, today I'm doing a promotion of Paula Andrés. Okay.
Yes. Did I pay for this or something?
No, actually not. Actually. No, but yeah, there's a very interesting video explainer by Paula explaining this new agricultural reserve fund, and basically this money, this support for farmers hit by the Ukrainian agriculture product influx. They're coming from this reserve fund. There was a first package of 56 million. The Commission put forward on Wednesday a second package, and this second package was about 100 million euro. Now, it's not clear how the EU, the Commission, came up with this amount of money. It's also this is also the most controversial aspect, because on one side we have three countries that are clearly in breach of the EU law. Not only the EU law, but this is also these are practices not allowed by the WTO as well. So there's a breach of the EU law and the breach of the international law. But in order to reduce the tension, the Commission is giving them money, which is the most controversial aspect. The other controversial aspect is that, again, there's no. It is unclear how the EU executive got to the figure of 100 million to compensate. Just to give to compensate farmers. Just to give you a flavor, the first package, we actually covered the development of this first package. The negotiation between the member states and the Commission, it actually took, I think, several weeks. It started at the beginning of February, and the Commission communicated the 56 million package at the end of March at the March Agrifish Council, so the gathering of the EU ministers. And just again, to give you a flavor, it considered the pressure on local prices from the excessive supply of cereals and oil seeds, the tension in the logistics chains. They had this criteria, which was the average storage capacity in the different countries over 5 years as a baseline measurement. So the first package was super detailed. Second package, the announcement came on Monday, and the definition of basically the figure, the envelope was basically 100 million, and it's still not clear how where it came from. So it also reinforces the idea that the EU is basically paying like a real blackmail approach from these member states. So this is also something that we try to cover, we try to point out. Again, since it's the use of the Agricultural Reserve Fund, this means that this has to pass through. It has to be approved by member states as well. Again, stay up to date if you want to stay up to date on the next developments on this issue. You can, of course, yeah, the developments of this issue. You can of course check on EURACTIV, because it's gonna be it's actually our bread and butter, covering this aspect of the EU agri-food policy. And another interesting topic last week, there were actually many developments on this live transport of animal, which is a
Yeah.
very important policy dossier, right, Paula?
Yes, yes, some things were moving. So on one hand, last week there was a leak on the impact assessment that the EU is currently undergoing for the EU animal welfare legislation revision. This revision of a legislation is supposed to come at the end of this year or in autumn, and it will look at animal welfare standards in the EU. So just for a small note, this legislation has not gone through any major adaptation since 2009, despite increased citizens awareness and a lot of new scientific advice available. So in this leak impact assessment, there are some measures that the EU is preferring or leaning towards, and these ones include, for example, the phase out of cages in farming, which is also was also part of a European Citizens Initiative, and of the cage age. It also asks to shorten the journeys of live animals. So we know that at least one third or over one third of live animal journeys are over 8 hours, between 8 and 24 hours. Um, the EU also wants to ban mutilations, for example, beak trimming for birds, and limit stocking density. These are some of the things that are included in the impact assessment. Then there are others that might be less clear. For example, the ban on fur farming, which is also a European Citizens Initiative. This is not so let's say the Commission doesn't take a preference on this because they say they're still waiting on political decisions. And then the other one that is a bit less clear, well, not less clear, but that they didn't take a mandatory measure, is the labeling of animal welfare, which is also part of citizens' calls to be better informed about the choices that they make, about the conditions of the animals that they consume. So this for the EU should be voluntary according to the assessment, even though the impact assessment revealed that a mandatory one would be more efficient, but they say that because most stakeholders prefer a voluntary approach, this is what they are leaning towards.
Yeah, the
So
voluntary approach is also, even in other policy area, has been experimented
yeah.
sometimes with no success, particularly on the side of food process and, for instance, alcohol labeling too. But it's also not controversial, but let's say that it's something that. I mean, it's not as resolutive as or decisive as sometimes it's promoted for this reason, not for
Yeah.
having the private companies on board, but sometimes it's been criticized by other sides, let's say.
Yeah, no, definitely. If the aim is to have an EU harmonized animal welfare labeling, I mean, the voluntary, it's I mean, even the assessment concludes that the fact that it's going to be voluntary is going to make it less efficient.
They know that.
Yeah, they
the
know
Commission.
that.
They know that. Yeah, just to clarify for our listeners, the impact assessment. We are at the stage of the legislation that it's before the Commission or the College of Commissioners, which is basically the EU Cabinet of Ministers, before the College adopt a proposal. So it's basically the Commission. It's setting some priorities, and then there are services like the famous DGs, like DG Sante for food safety, DG Agri for agriculture, and so on. And these services, they're basically evaluating existing legislation. The Commission put together this draft impact assessment that is assessed, let's say, by this regulatory scrutiny board, which is an independent body. Is within the Commission, but is independent because it has this role of advising the College of Commissioners, and basically the main role of the RSB is to guarantee this quality control, the quality of the legislation. Also because particularly before the Juncker Commission, there was a lot of criticism about the quality of the legislation. Super complicated, with objectives not entirely clear. But as we were listening from Paula, actually the ambition is quite clear, and also the policy options are clear, no?
Yeah, no, I have to say that many animal welfare organizations are quite happy with these results. So yeah, it has been, let's say broadly, it has been welcomed by civil society NGOs. So yeah, this is one part, but then there was something else going on this week, more specifically on the live animal transport in the EU. Which I have to say, this happened before the leak impact assessment. So that was on Tuesday last week, when the European Court of Auditors released a review. It is not a report because it does not bring, let's say, new data, but it's a review of existing information that they have collected, and they took conclusions out of this information that is publicly available. And so mainly they found two things. They were searching for a reason why there is a transport of live animals, and they found that the reason mainly is economic and regulatory differences between member states. So this difference may benefit producers or transporters because, for example, slaughter costs can be cheaper in one country or in another, or sanctions can be more relaxed in one country or in another one. So this increases the chances that animals are going to be transported from one place to another to be able to benefit from this regulation or uneven implementation. But then another second conclusion that they took is the lack of centralized data in the EU on the transport of live animals. So apparently there is no centralized full picture of the EU live animals transport. They have also put together a dashboard, an interactive dashboard, where you can see this information clearly. Where do member states export or import live animals from, and these kind of things. But for this, we have spoke actually to Eva Lindström, member of the European Court of Auditors, who led this review. So we will find out more about the status of live animal transport in the EU with her.
Last week, you published a review on the challenges and opportunities regarding the transport of live animals in the EU, which actually reviewed publicly available information. Which were the motivations then behind this review?
Well, first of all, it's needless to say that a lot of citizens are concerned about animal welfare. And some of us, from time to time, I think we have seen many lorries transporting live animals. We also know that over a third of live animals transport between member states takes over 8 hours, and also that animal welfare rules are not always respected. So I think it's reasonable to ask the question, how come we transport so many live animals across Europe instead of transporting meat? I think also many listeners are aware that in recent years, several studies, not at least from different NGOs, have highlighted the poor conditions animals can endure during transport. And also the European Parliament has set up a specific committee of inquiry on the protection of animals during transport. And in particular, this committee and the Parliament asked for restrictions on journey times, on checks on the export of live animals to non-EU countries, and also clearly expressed a preference for transporting meat rather than live animals. And of course, as the EU's financial watchdog, but also as the advocate of citizens' concerns, I think we as the Court of Auditors had a good look into the topic and produced our factual analysis on this issue.
And now digging a bit deeper, could you briefly tell us, according to your findings, what drives live animal transport in the EU?
Well, I can take a helicopter view on this. I'd say that it's the regional differences in costs, meaning the costs of both slaughter, breeding, and fattening, that are cheaper in some countries than in others. And also we see from studies published that in many cases it's actually cheaper to transport live animals than meat. So we see clearly that these economic reasons are very much the driving forces behind animal transport between EU countries. So to put it more simple, I mean, it's still profitable to transport live animals, even if this is less green and sustainable than transporting meat. On the other hand, there are also regulatory reasons. For example, we see that the agriculture policy has so far paid attention to animal welfare on the farm, but not during transport. And one could actually say that, to be a little bit catchy, there's a gap in the cap. There is, of course, regulation in the field of transport, but we see that member states enforce EU animal transport rules unevenly. And this means that there is a risk that transporters could actually exploit loopholes that derive from the different national sanction systems. And differing sanction systems among member states creates a risk of what I would call sort of control shopping. And we know that no chain is stronger than the weakest link. So we need to ensure that even the weak links are robust enough to discourage rule breaking.
And with the upcoming EU animal welfare legislation revision that is supposed to come in the second half of this year, may I ask you how you expect these findings that you just described, how do you expect them to influence this upcoming legislation? More specifically, maybe in terms of the length of the journeys and also the potential ban that was in the air on exports of live animals to third countries.
Well, as always, I expect the Commission to take our conclusions and our analysis into account. And right now they are looking at the EU rules and will present something later this year. And of course, my expectation that they will take our analysis on board. I could also mention that during the course of our work, I had the opportunity to meet both commissioners responsible, Ms. Kyriakides and Mr. Wojciechowski, and at least when I met them, I think both of them expressed that they were welcoming our report and also saw that as important contributions for their view on the rules. And ultimately, I think it's in everyone's interest, really, to firm up the rules. So, as we also heard from some NGOs and also industry representatives that we met earlier this week, that this could be a win-win situation. When we started our work, I also met with some MEPs who are working on this file. So I think, at least that's my impression, that there is an appetite among the legislators to heed our messages. But of course, at the end of the day, these are political decisions and they are taken in both in Brussels, but of course also in the member states.
I also wanted to highlight something that I found a bit surprising, and it's that according to your review, paying a fine can be cheaper than actually following the rules. For example, something that is in the review is that the fine for transporting a bull with a broken leg is around 250 euros, while the approximate value of a slaughtered bull can be around 1,500 euros. So I wanted to know, is this a generalized issue or is this only specific in certain member states? And also, how can we change this?
Well, penalty setting and application, it's delegated to the member states, and there are significant differences in the types of sanctions imposed for non-compliance and also to what extent the sanctions are dissuasive. And the example that you mentioned, I think that really illustrates two things. First, we need sanctions that are dissuasive, but it's also important that we have more of a harmonized systems of controls. And as I said earlier, no chain is stronger than the weakest link. And I could just give you some examples when it comes to the penalties and the sanctions. In Germany, for example, the fines range up to 25,000 euro. Could compare that to Denmark, where it varies between 2,000 and 13,000 euro. And on the other hand, in Italy or Romania, there are lower fines. They vary between 1,000 and 6,000 euros. And of course, the bottom line is that the sanctions do not generally act as deterrent to poor practice or illegal activity, as operators might perceive the sanctions to be too low compared to the price obtained for the animal.
As a last question, you mentioned before during a press briefing that it is better to transport meat than live animals. And maybe to close our conversation, I wanted to ask you if this is the direction, if you think this is the direction where we are going to, or if animal transport is on the rise. And also, where does the EU mainly export these animals? Because you also published a very interesting dashboard with some data to where we can see and track exports of live animals. So maybe there was something interesting in there that you would like to highlight.
Well, talking about trends, it has been different development for different species of animals. We know, for example, that the intra-trade within the EU of bovine animals has risen 19% between 2012 and 2021. And at the same time, transport of pigs have decreased 9%. Looking at the top exporters in the EU, we know that the top exporters of pigs is the Netherlands, and they exported 33 million pigs between 2017 and 2021. Most of these pigs go to Germany. When it comes to poultry, Germany is the top exporter, mainly going to Netherlands, and when it comes to cattle, France is the top exporter, exporting mainly to Italy. But we also have looked, of course, at the export that goes to other countries and continents, and top exporters of lamb is Romania, that exports to Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Libya. And I think also it's important to underline that it's not just transport for slaughter, but it also transports for breeding and fattening. And during the lifetime of an animal, they might move around quite a few times. So what I wanted to stress today is that we do not have a fully harmonized system between member states in terms of penalties, sanctions, or even the enforcement of EU rules. And to conclude, I think the main driving force behind all these animal transports that happens daily is the economic factors, and also that animal suffering is not integrated into the price nor of meat or transport. And to put it very bluntly, actually this means that animal suffering during transport is currently still for free.
And that's all from us this week. And this week, like every week, the EURACTIV's Agrifood podcast is produced by EURACTIV's Agrifood team. That's me, Gerardo Fortuna, and Paula Andrés, with the technical support of EURACTIV podcast producer, Eva Lindström.
This podcast is also available on major streaming platforms like Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter so you don't miss the latest agricultural news from the EU. I'm Paula Andrés, thank you for listening, and see you next week.